Good morning and welcome to the second week of WIRRED's live living room sessions. If you caught Tuesday's session, you would have heard CPRI's Jen exploring regenerative economics with Regen Network's Chief Regeneration Officer, author, and farmer Gregory Langdua. If you're joining us for the first time, WIRRED's live living room sessions is a series of future-focused webinars, creating a space for disruptive and innovative conversations with local and international thought leaders. We will be exploring every Tuesday at 1 p.m. and Thursday at 11 a.m. the topics of regenerative agriculture, climate change, building biodiversity, and renewable energy. In alignment with good regenerative practice, we at Walker's Institute for Regenerative Research, Education and Design, WIRRED, are strategically partnering with our education partners, the Caribbean Permaculture Research Institute, or CPRI, and we're powered by the Inter-American Development Bank. My name is Kiesha, and today I am excited to have a chat with Ethan Soloviev, Chief Innovation Officer at howgood.com. Ethan is also an author and organic farmer, and today's topic will focus on biodiversity, regenerative agriculture, and planetary health, taking the leap. Through howgood.com, Ethan manages the world's largest product sustainability database, providing Fortune 100 retail and CPG companies with market-driven insights to spot emerging trends and dissect the competitive landscape, all within the regenerative enterprise paradigm. Welcome, Ethan.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Where are you joining us from today?
I am a couple hours north of New York City. I'm just about 2 minutes from my farm here. It's a little town called High Falls, and there's actually a gigantic waterfall. I can almost see it from my office here, where the Rondout Creek flows down and heads towards the Hudson River.
Oh, that's awesome. That sounds quite beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I would be happy to. So as already pointed out, I'm a farmer. I have 30 acres here, primarily of apple trees, but also integrated with grass-fed lamb. So we have a flock of sheep that actually runs and grazes underneath the apple trees, which is really lovely because I don't really like to mow very much, and the sheep are awesome at mowing. Plus, they add fertilizer, so we don't have to. So we've got sheep there, and then also my wife has a shiitake mushroom enterprise that produces the most delicious, very, very high quality log-grown shiitake. She has about 1,000 logs that are sold locally here, and then we also lease land to different folks who have a vegetable CSA, Asian vegetable CSA. And a flower grower. So it's a diversified multi-enterprise farm that's more on the personal side. And then I also work for HowGood, which is the world's leading provider of sustainability data, especially for food products, but also for health and beauty and cleaning products that are out there. And we'll talk more about that as we go. I guess the last thing I'd say is that I'm a regenerative agriculture geek, I guess you could say. I've been studying and working towards practicing regenerative agriculture for about 15 years now. Have written a number of papers on the subject, put out one of the earlier definitions of regenerative agriculture, just published a map actually that would be great for folks to have access to. That's just at the end of last year, that's a map of the regenerative agriculture industry that has 186 or so different organizations, companies, nonprofits, farms, brands that are using and promoting regenerative agriculture.
Right. Well, from the sounds of that farm, you're definitely stacking functions. That is a term that we love to use at WIRRED, stacking functions, having things with multiple use, and definitely not having to mow the lawn is definitely a plus. Well, Ethan, I think a good place to start with today's discussion would be at the beginning. For some of our listeners, this would be a first time. For many of them, they may have read about regenerative agriculture and would have heard different definitions. Mm-hmm. So I think just to set the stage and to create a foundation for today's discussion, how would you define regenerative agriculture? As a true geek, as a true regenerative agriculture geek, how would you define it?
It's a funny, I laugh when I saw you were going to ask this question because I actually work to get people not to define regenerative agriculture most of the time, because I think one of the challenges is that people want to like define it and put it in a box so that it can only be this one thing. Like some people say, well, regenerative agriculture is all about soil health. And so all you have to do is improve the soil, and that's regenerative. And for me, that's not enough. It's not only about the soil. Yes, of course, the soil is important. Some other people want to say, well, you know, we're being regenerative as long as we're increasing the economic profitability of farmers. I say, well, that's not it as well either. It's like regenerative agriculture at its core aims to leave the earth a better place than when you started. You're not just like doing less harm. This is from a conservative mindset. Sort of conservation is like, how do I use less pesticides, or how do I reduce soil erosion? How do I use less water? And all of these sort of like minimizing harm or doing less bad are definitely not regenerative. Okay, then there's this sort of like midpoint, the sustainable, where we say, well, we're having zero impact. I'm aiming for you know, a sustainable, no impact, net zero farm. And so I usually think about that and I say, well, you know, if you were asked about your relationship with your spouse, with your significant other, and somebody asked you, well, how is it? How is that relationship? And you said, well, it's sustainable. Is that really what we're aiming for? Yeah, it's about a net zero.
Yeah.
Right?
Divorce is around the corner.
and also, you know, if you think at the end of your life, if you're on your deathbed and somebody asks, well, what's the impact you had in the world? And you said, well, it was about net zero. That's not really, you know, that's not exactly what we want or need to be doing in this day and age. And so the idea from regenerative is that you're going beyond sustainable, you're going beyond net zero, and you're actually adding value. You're creating new potential. You're enhancing biodiversity. You're increasing the water holding capacity. You're building carbon in the soil. The people there are, you know, well fed with great nutrition, loving their food. Regenerative aims to leave more in the world. It ends up a better place than when you started. But it's also not quite as simple as that. There's a number of other details that we can get into about what really makes something regenerative. For example, the practices that I'm doing on my farm here in, you know, the New York, where it snows for, you know, 3, 4, 6 months out of the year, those are not the right practices for regenerative agriculture in Barbados or anywhere in the Caribbean.
Right.
And so you hear this term sometimes where people say regenerative practice, like what are the regenerative agriculture practices you're using? And what I always say is there are none. There's no such thing as a regenerative agriculture practice. There are many different practices. What you have to look for are, what are the outcomes? What actually happens in your place as a result of how you are engaging with and working with the land? And that's really important. That part of regeneration, from my perspective, is that every farm is unique, just like every person is unique. Every person is their own person. They have their own kind of core essence that nobody else has. And so each farm should be that way. Each landscape is like that. And to actually have regeneration happening, you need to kind of key into what is unique about me and my land and the relationship between me and my land, and what can I produce and grow on this farm that is unique in the market and for the world. Yeah.
You know, there are a couple of key words as you were speaking that just kind of popped out to me, you know. So regenerative agriculture is progressive. It's not stagnant. It's not just finding a happy medium and just staying there. It's progressive. It's forward. It's growth focused. It's innovative. I'm also hearing that it's adaptable, right? So you're not just taking one paradigm that was perfected, let's say, as you said, in the US, and then trying to translate it exactly into Barbados, which has a completely different set of circumstances, different culture, different temperature, different weather patterns, different political system, you know, different spiritual beliefs, all of those different things. You have to factor that into the space. So again, another word that pops up to me is that it's holistic, right? It's very much taking into consideration a multiplicity of factors. So I want to just kind of pivot again a bit and just kind of hone in on what you said about biodiversity and building biodiversity. And I'm actually going to read directly from one of your pieces, a statement that you said, and ask you to elaborate on it. So you said that biodiversity is a key factor in the Earth's provision of ecosystem services, including biomass production, nutrient and water recycling, and soil formation and retention. But the ongoing mounting losses to biodiversity are not simply an environmental issue. And for me, that's a very eye-opening, thing to say, because most people tend to think biodiversity, environmental issue. That's it. So could you elaborate on that statement? Why is biodiversity loss not simply an environmental issue? And what is missing from that conversation about biodiversity?
Yeah. Well, biodiversity is key in my mind within regenerative agriculture for a number of reasons. But I think what you're pointing to here is really interesting. So it's not just environmental. Loss of biodiversity has significant economic consequences and significant cultural consequences. And both of those are things that are, sometimes left out of discussions about biodiversity. Biodiversity is sometimes seen as sort of only conservation people or ecologists think about it and work on it. But I work with some of the largest food producing companies in the world, some of the largest food manufacturers. And to them, more and more, biodiversity is seen as this essential part of their innovation strategy, of their profit centers, of what's engaging with consumers around the world, because they can create all sorts of fascinating products that draw on the unique biodiversity of individual places, specific fruits, specific sweeteners. Like there's a new sweetener that's coming to market now that's a monk fruit, which is a perennial vine. It's actually related to a squash. It makes these hard little round, I guess they're like dry squashes, but they are incredibly sweet. They're something like 1,000 times as sweet as sugar, but with 0 calories. Oh. And it's a very rare crop. Nobody's growing it all over the world, except for in a particular province, in a particular place in China is where most of the world production is. But it's an incredible flavor. It's really sweet, and it's for me, it's better than stevia. It's better than some of the other plant-based ones. It doesn't have as much kind of weird side flavors, and it can produce foods that are low in sugar, low in calories, but with a great flavor. But it's also just it's a really cool, interesting plant. It's a vine. It grows in the tropics, so you could grow it in agroforestry systems or other kind of non-conventional, just monoculture tillage systems. And so it's just a fascinating crop. But all of that was to say this is an example of where economic innovation can come from a particular level of biodiversity. At this point, I'm just talking about, in a way, the agricultural or the sort of crop diversity, which is the sum total of all the different species, animal, plant, fungal, even, bacterial, microbial species that are available out there that might be used, for human consumption, for human food. There's huge diversity there. And along with the economic side, there's a cultural aspect to the foods that we eat. Many places all over the world have their unique food fingerprint, you could call it. And the loss of those food crops, the loss of the species that aren't necessarily food, maybe they're medicine, maybe they're supporting the whole ecosystem where some of the food grows, that loss often will parallel the loss of indigenous cultures in different places, the loss of language, the loss of the sort of mega diversity of human history. If you look, historically in certain parts of the world, the places where the plants are most diverse and they can't see any people there and they say, wow, these are really amazing. There's all these different species and there's this edible nut and there's that vine and there's this herb and all these things. And they find out that these are the places where people were living a long time ago. So the human interrelationship with biodiversity is hugely important beyond just, the environmental aspect of it.
Yeah, what you're saying really resonates because even in terms of a global scale and looking at international development agencies, they are all pointing towards the fact that we're probably not going to meet our, sustainable development goals, as it relates to poverty, hunger, health, water, cities, climate, ocean, land, any of them, if we continue with the massive destruction or the trend towards biodiversity destruction, right, and destruction of ecosystems. So definitely it does have an entire impact outside of just the environment, exactly as you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, just one more thought on that. Like, actually, there's a new publication that just came out, and it's only applicable for the Northeast, for cold temperate climates. It's 100 pages long. It's a free PDF that's about edible weeds on farms. And it's a whole treatise on basically like how to make money out of these more biodiverse, these weeds that we don't like, and yet how to work them into part of the economic viability of agriculture. And so I think that's such exactly in the right direction of like, biodiversity is really good for economics. It's really cool when you show up at a farmer's market or when you have an offering to a food manufacturing company that's a totally new crop that they don't know about. Maybe it's a weed and it grows really easily, but you could just get it and offer it, and it shows your ingenuity, innovation in putting something forward into the market. Yeah,
definitely. I'm going to move into the 8 Levels of Biodiversity Framework. And I'm really excited about this topic and how that fits into the whole living systems framework for regenerative enterprise. So the question is, what is the 8 Levels of Biodiversity Framework, and how does it fit into that the whole or the living systems framework for regenerative enterprise?
Yeah. So that's a big question.
It is a big question.
I'll walk through the 8 levels, and I think what's useful is if you are, if you're listening to this and you have a food producing company, you're making food products, or you have a farm or even a garden, I want you to see if you can make this tangible. So as I talk through it, you think about, well, what does that mean in my garden? What does that mean in the products that I'm selling in the market? What does that mean for how does my business impact each of these levels? Have I thought about that? And then just kind of notice, like, what new ideas emerge? What kind of creative thoughts are, oh, what about this? Or, oh, that's how to think about that. But make it really like tangible, grounded in yourself, as opposed to just what I'm saying and the examples I'm giving. Okay, so we've already started with a level that I often begin with, though I wouldn't say it's necessarily the first level. There is no first. There's also no better or worse. You can think of these as levels sort of on top of each other, but it doesn't mean that the top is better or that the bottom is worse. They are a nested hierarchy of how to see and understand the world and biodiversity in the world. So the first level that we talked about was agricultural biodiversity. And so this is, again, the sum total of all the different species of plants, of animals, of fungus. So this is the difference between the monk fruit I was talking about and a tomato and a shiitake mushroom and a sheep, right? This is this agricultural level of biodiversity. And people are more and more saying, in their products, like, oh, this is more biodiverse product because I'm putting quinoa into it, or I'm adding oats in here, and that's a less common crop, a less common food that is used. That is the level that we're speaking about here in agricultural biodiversity. We can go smaller from there, and we can also go kind of larger in scale from there. I'll go smaller first. On the smaller side, within a given species, there's a level of biodiversity that's called genetic biodiversity. So this is saying within apples, as a particular crop, there are 23,000 named varieties of apples. I grow about 100 of them on my farm. So this is the difference between a Fuji apple and a Gala apple and a Granny Smith and a Golden Delicious, right? This is the diversity within a species, or within goats or within sheep. There are many different breeds of animals within that. So that's the genetic diversity, which is also really interesting. The heritage, the heirloom, the beans, the corns, all of that genetic diversity is really important and applies just as well, especially when thinking about the cultural diversity that we spoke about before. The next level down in detail is what I'll call microbial biodiversity. So this isn't just looking at the particular crop or the diversity within it. This is going down to the level of microbes and the soil biology, the soil food web, all of the cilia, nematodes, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, arthropods that are moving around in the soil. This microbial diversity is essential for living life, for high production in agriculture. There's also a microbial diversity that's really important inside each living being, each person or each animal, that we've heard a lot about recently, about the microbiome. And this is really important for human health, nutrition, sickness and disease responses, is our internal microbial diversity. And what the food, the more diverse agriculturally and genetically that we eat, the more diverse and healthy our internal microbial diversity will be. So there's a linkage there. And then the final kind of smallest level that I've identified is a level of chemical biodiversity. And so this is even smaller, even more fine-grained than at the microbial. This is the actual chemical constituents that create flavor, that create preservation qualities, that create color. These sort of tiny chemicals that are inside of all living things. There's a great diversity there. And the more that you're supporting agricultural, genetic, microbial diversity, the greater chance you'll have at a higher level of chemical and biodiversity at that level. Okay, so that was going down: agricultural, genetic,
Chemical.
microbial, chemical. Now we'll go up in scale from agriculture. So above agriculture is a level of what I call species diversity. And this is looking at the whole ecosystem, say if you're thinking about a farm, around the farm. So this is the birds and the bees and the animals and all of the other creatures and forms of life that are not just the crops you're growing on your farm, but are ones that are impacted by what you're growing. So when you cut down, rainforest in Malaysia and Borneo to plant monoculture palm oil, then you're decreasing the overall species biodiversity of the area. So that's at that species level. Even a step up from that is the level of biodiversity that's about land use. So this is looking, either on your farm or on a kind of small area of farms. What are the different land uses that are happening? Is there some that is, a tilled up annual agriculture? Is there some grazing of animals in a permanent pasture? Is there an agroforestry system? Is there some wild forest? Is there a pond or an integration of ponds and wetlands? This is sort of at a land use scale, the different ways that land are being used, but in a smaller area.
Right.
When you're looking at your farm, you want a diversity of land use on the farm itself to provide multiple functions and ecosystem support. And it also gives you a greater chance then to enhance agricultural and genetic and microbial diversity on the farm.
Right.
You can also zoom out and look at an ecoregion scale. This is the next level up. At the ecoregion, you're looking at land use, but across a wider area. So you're looking at, say, the whole island of Barbados or any Caribbean island, and saying, what is the biodiversity of this whole ecoregion? Is there enough, or is there a balance between urban centers and wild places and agriculturally cultivated and conserved area? Like, what is the overall balance here? Are there wildlife corridors that can move between things? Are there flows between agricultural systems that add to economies of scale there? You're looking at the ecoregion as a whole. And then the top level that we'll talk about is the level of global biodiversity. So this is when you're zooming out and seeing Earth as a whole and saying, where are the global hotspots? Where is there incredibly large amounts of biodiversity? Where is biodiversity at risk? And what impacts does my farm, does my product have on that global level? What am I doing either to have negative impacts, or what am I doing to preserve or grow species on my farm that are maybe being lost from the rainforest somewhere else? So this is that global level. All of these levels are nested, these 8 levels, from global down to chemical, and they all impact each other. And I think the core point, the big takeaway to think about from a regenerative enterprise perspective is my actions as a business significantly impact each of the different levels.
Yeah.
And thinking about what that impact is it negative? Is it decreasing biodiversity? Or is it that zero? Am I maybe not doing bad, but not doing good either? Or am I having a net positive impact? Am I increasing biodiversity? Am I supporting the preservation or even the increase of the number of global biodiversity hotspots? And then the other side of that, so if you see sort of like the impact that you're having on all these levels, the outcomes from each level can be very valuable for business, for food companies. You know, from the different levels, you can get new crops that you've never used before. You can get new flavors that you've never, used before. You can have new cuisines or ideas for foods out of the sort of larger ecoregion or level of biodiversity. So there's all these incredible products that can help in innovation, that can help in overall business health and viability, especially if you're aiming to have a positive impact on all the different levels. If you're degrading all the different levels, you're degrading your own capability to innovate from them.
Yeah, I know for the nerds among us, that was beautiful. And for anybody who would want to read up more about it, we're definitely going to put a link to your website in the recording for this video when we post the recording for the video, so that persons can have a read about it. Thank you so much for very clearly going through the different levels. And I think you definitely touched on how, using that 8 levels of biodiversity understanding creates this new lens that you can look at how you can improve your design, or creatively move towards a positive global impact. So I think now I'm going to ask you to talk about howgood.com and how the work that you're doing can help businesses do that, because this is a lot of information to take in, and for a lot of persons it's, I want to do good. How? How do I do this? And how do I do it and still remain profitable? Because that's always a concern, right? So how do I do good and do well? So the question is, can you give us an idea of how the work you're doing with howgood.com can help businesses accomplish what we were just talking about?
Definitely. So HowGood is a small company. We're a startup that has built the world's largest product sustainability database that includes a significant look at what are the impacts of biodiversity of any given food product that's out there. So we have more than 1 million products in our database. And there's different ways that people make use of this kind of core database we have. The database has 127 different sustainability attributes that are in it, that are tracked to every individual UPC, each product that's out there. And those attributes include things like, is it organic, or is it regenerative, or is it having a big or a small impact on biodiversity, or is there child or slave labor in the supply chain, or risk of that in the supply chain of this product, to how highly processed is the product. So there's this huge amount of information, and that is, it's too much for anyone to look through all the different pieces, but we simplify it. We summarize it and roll it up into a really just straightforward form, where for any given product, you can find out, is it good, great, or best in terms of overall sustainability impact for the world. And so we make that information available in different ways. For just consumers that are out there, that are shopping, that are curious about what's on your shelves, you can download the HowGood app. There's a smartphone app that you can get off the app stores, where you just scan a barcode or you type in a particular product, and it will show you that assessment, that sort of good, great, or best, or it might say standards not met. And actually, most of the food system, 75% of the foods that are out there are standards not met, not the sort of top 25, 15, 5%, which is what good, great, and best is. You can also see a little more detail into growing practices, into processing protocols, into company conduct when you look at each product. And so we make that freely available to anyone out there who wants to check products. We also partner with grocery stores and retailers to basically make available, sorry about that,
it's okay.
to make that information available in the supermarket. So in some grocery stores, Ahold Delhaize is an example. They have stores in the Washington, D.C. area, actually all around the U.S. You can go into the store, and right next to the price tag So you're looking at 3 different, I don't know, peanut butters or fruits, and you can see right next to the price tag, you see the little how good stamp that says good, great, or best, and that helps you make better decisions about, okay, what food to get. It also helps the retailers to sell more sustainable products, and helps them find and access the most sustainable, the products that I would say are the furthest on the path to being regenerative. There are very, very few products that I would actually consider regenerative that are out there, but this system helps to find it. So that's for consumers, and then retailers who we partner with, grocery stores, etc. And then the last thing that we do that I think is really interesting, because it takes the full depth of data that we have and puts it right in the hands of decision makers. And specifically for those people who are making products, who are producing a beauty product or a food product, and have to make choices between what ingredient do I use, where do I source it from, what certifications should I use, we provide a more detailed viewpoint into all of these different sustainability questions, so you can improve your products as you go. And this is what some of the largest food companies in the world are working with in order to improve the products that they offer on sustainability.
Oh, that's excellent. All right, so we're going to switch to questions from the audience at this point, and I'm going to ask for the first question from the audience. If it is that you are now joining us for the first time, you are listening to WIRRED's live living room sessions, and we will be doing sessions every Tuesday and Thursday. Tuesdays at 1 p.m., Thursdays at 11 p.m. We are talking to Ethan from howgood.com. We are definitely going to be posting this, the recording of today's session, on the WIRRED's YouTube channel, and of course you can view it on CPRI's Facebook page and WIRRED's Facebook page. All right, so let's take the first question from our audience. All right, and so the question is, and it's looking really small, what are the limiting factors to rolling out the certifications for howgood.com in the
CPRI?
In Barbados. It's in Barbados.
In Barbados. Yeah. I don't think there are too many limiting factors. Let's do it. That sounds great. I mean, basically we need a retail partner. Anybody can sort of, have the, you can download the phone now, and I bet a lot of the products that you have in grocery stores in Barbados will already be in the system. But if you want to actually get the tags sort of in a store, then we basically just need a retail partner who is interested in giving that sort of transparency to their customers. The thing that I can say, and why I'm saying there's not actually that many limits, is over time we've shown that grocery stores actually make a bunch of money when they implement the system. It's very useful and profitable for stores. We don't charge any brands anything to assess the products, but when we partner with a retailer, they pay us a low fee per store per year. But usually what happens is that when consumers get access to this information, they immediately start purchasing the more sustainable products. And those products, many times over, are ones that also do really well for the store. So we see overall stores actually increase their sales and increase their sales of sustainable products. Overall store sales go up 3 to 5%, while the more sustainable products, the more sustainable farmers and brands, those are the ones that actually grow and see the most growth. So there's not actually really any limits. We just need to find a retail partner who's excited to sell more sustainable products and increase their own profitability by doing so.
All right, great. So there you have your answer. Could we have the next question? All right. So where would the average farmer start? We want to build biodiversity and become more regenerative. Can you suggest the first, let's say, 3 steps?
First 3 steps. I would say, it's really useful to do like a deep self-assessment first to understand myself, and my farm. What am I currently growing? What are other people growing? What is the like level of biodiversity? We're kind of focusing on that here, that I currently have. And then the other thing to do in parallel for that is look into the history and the past of your farm and your place and say, traditionally, indigenously, what was being grown here? How was that being grown? What am I doing in that direction, or what could I be doing in that direction? And that sort of study will always uncover fascinating things. Like you'll find some, I don't know, some fruit that this part of the island was known for. Like I actually remember working in the Walker's project there. There was a particular fruit that everybody from the local community would come to pick from that place that they loved, and they couldn't get it anywhere else on the island or nowhere else nearby. And so we said, well, maybe this is an important crop that isn't being planted anywhere that should be grown more there. So that's sort of like looking into the history and the past can uncover some really interesting directions for you to take towards biodiversity, towards regeneration. The next thing I would do is to start right away engaging with your customers around this journey and this idea. And that's important for a couple reasons. One, you don't want to like be quietly doing something and make a big change and then have all your customers say, wait a minute, where's that, pollen that I love? Where's that thing you used to grow? You want to be engaging them so that they're sort of coming with you on the journey and understanding what's hard about it and being your ally and support as a farmer in moving in this direction. But also, your customers will often have really good ideas about what they want towards that, that step number one. That's sort of like looking into the history and the past. They might remember things and say, somebody used to grow here this amazing tomato. Have you ever had that or seen that? It would be so good if we could get that. And you say, no, I have no idea. I've never even heard of that. Where could I, do you know where I could get the seeds? And I say, well, we've been growing it in our yard for just one plant for years. And if you want some seeds, you could have it. But these are the really old ones that used to grow here. And so now all of a sudden you have a relationship, you have a committed customer. Because I think an important thing as a farmer that not all farmers, I'm a farmer, I work with a lot of farmers. Not all farmers really want to be marketing and selling. Most farmers want to be growing.
Yeah.
And so I think part of regeneration is not just doing good by the land or doing good by biodiversity. It's developing strong enough reciprocal relationships with your customers. They are actually part of you regenerating yourself and your land in the longer term journey. So I don't know, that was 2 steps. Maybe do that and get back to me if you want the third.
Well, you have to have an idea of what your customer wants, right? Going back to that whole conversation that you started with, looking back at what was in the past, what was grown in the past. I think in the Caribbean, we have such a rich heritage of that. There's so many things that your granny used to make and do and give you, like, things that you take before you go back to school to clean out your system and that kind of thing. And now, we go and we buy these vitamins off the shelf and we buy all these other things, but there's so many things that we can get straight from, crops that are no longer being grown. The seeds are available. You can grow them, and there are natural ways that you can get the same, actually better benefits from those things. So just kind of looking at what do people want, and then looking back at that ancestral knowledge, looking back at, what was culturally used within your space, and even across the Caribbean, and then looking at how you can, revive those products, because people are looking for them.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to that. I totally agree, Kiesha. And what's important there is that you said it at the end, we're reviving, bringing to life, regenerating a way to work with and engage these crops, these farming systems. Regenerative agriculture is not about going back to something. It's not about going to where we were. It's about looking back and learning, but then regenerating it for the current situation, the current climate, the current customers. You have to make it fresh and new and relevant to what you're doing and how you want to increase biodiversity. Ooh, I thought that's the third thing. Just a quick little third thing on that question is use that levels of biodiversity framework and say, what am I doing at each level to have a positive impact on biodiversity? That would be the third step.
I'll just make one statement before we go into the next question, which is all of this also has direct impacts on food security, which is a major concern for the Caribbean region. And so the more biodiverse your farms are, you're looking at, increasing food security, but you're also looking at possibly if there were to be any type of, plague that would wipe out certain crops, you then have alternatives, so there's a whole structure, a whole network of things that get into play that definitely impact different aspects of the challenges that we're experiencing, positively impact the different challenges that we're experiencing with food security within the region. All right, so let's take the next question. And the question is, how is your apple forest from Kazakhstan? Is it commercially successful?
It's a great question from a great person from Chinggis there. Chinggis is actually a distant relative of Genghis Khan, and knows a thing or two about the wild apple forests of Kazakhstan.
Oh, wow, awesome.
Which is an amazing global biodiversity hotspot that I've visited many times, 3 times for a number of months over the years, and had the opportunity and pleasure working with the United States Department of Agriculture to bring back some of the wild apple genetics from Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, they have these whole forests that are literally made up of wild apple trees, where everywhere you go, it's a different apple variety. And there's also pears and raspberries and strawberries and bilberries and onions and licorice and this huge diversity of crops. It's a wild food forest there in Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
And so, with what I've brought back and with what I've been able to get from the gene banks here in the United States, I have planted a number of trials of basically recreating those wild apple forests, but in a commercially, aiming towards commercial viability on a farm scale. So I would say there has been some commercial success. I would not say that any of the orchards I planted are fully viable, break even, generating massive amounts of profit in and of themselves. But they have been very interesting and successful at creating significant change in the world and drawing attention and energy, which is added to the financial viability of the farming systems that I've set up. And that, I think, is something really interesting. Actually, here's an example. Hold on. This is something that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation did, which works on circular economy of food. And they actually saw one of these rare wild apples from Kazakhstan, and they created a whole global campaign about it. I don't know if you can see that. It says, could the solution to climate change also be delicious? And then right on the back of the card, they put on these wild Kazakh apples that are actually red-fleshed inside the apple. So it's like a blood orange, except it's red inside the apple. So this is now a global campaign where people know more about Kazakhstan and the wild apple. So there's a degree of commercial viability, even if the orchards themselves aren't necessarily raking in the cash yet.
I got you. Oh, that sounds really good. All right, our next question is, hey, Ethan, can you talk a little bit about carbon farming and its potential to grow food and sink carbon?
So carbon farming is part of the basic core of most regenerative agriculture. It's one of the sort of the most straightforward levels and ways to be approaching regenerative agriculture, especially if you're at a pretty big scale, if you're in a larger production scenario. Carbon farming aims to work with the natural powers of plants and animals to suck carbon out of the atmosphere and sink it into the ground. So this is a way to work against the global shifts that are happening in climate because of greenhouse gases. And instead of having agriculture be part of the problem, which in many cases it's emitting a significant amount of greenhouse gases, agriculture can flip itself and become one of the main solutions to getting carbon and other gases out of the atmosphere and into our soil and into biomass. And the interesting thing about this is that doing that is not like this expensive thing that is only for environmental good and you don't see any benefits from. Adding carbon to the soil, adding carbon into the biomass in your farming system actually increases the viability of your crops. It makes it easier to hold water. It makes it greater microbial activity that cycles nutrients more. It makes the soil more fertile overall. And so carbon farming actually increases food production in the short, mid, and long term. And so it's a simple, straightforward step. Well, I shouldn't say it's simple. There's a bunch that goes into figuring out how to carbon farm in your particular situation. And there's many folks working on this now. Everyone from, I think Gregory, who you heard from last time, to there's other outfits out there that are like Understanding Ag, that are teaching farmers specifically how to do carbon farming. There's large companies, like you can look at some public stuff from General Mills that makes, Cheerios, and Wheaties. Like, they are investing money into regenerative agriculture and carbon farming in large scale grain and sugar beet and growing regions all throughout the US and beyond, about how do you do carbon farming at scale. So that's what I would say. I think carbon farming has huge potential. Scientifically, the most carbon capturing systems are agroforestry systems, are systems that combine tree crops with agriculture. And that could be, actual like growing mangoes or avocados or jackfruit or the actual crops you get from them. But it could also be planting long-term timber crops like a teak in the tropics or a black walnut that, you can get agricultural yield out of the system, but then you also have a longer-term timber harvest.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen amazing results over the last 6 years in our orchard at Walker's Reserve, where we are implementing those permaculture patterns. And it's amazing when you do the before and after pictures, but and you also look at doing exactly what you said, having that companion planting that allows larger long-term, like teak, etc., to grow among agricultural crop and really creating a whole system that feeds off each other. We've been seeing amazing results as we continue to regenerate. And for those of you who may not know, our Walker's Reserve project is the regeneration of a silica sand mine, and there's not much nutrient value in silica sand. But through the methods that Ethan has just described, we have been able to grow food. We've been able to grow a lot of indigenous fruits that are indigenous to the Caribbean, but also build the soil to such a state that we actually we're doing it in a phased way and having it done zone by zone. All right, let's have a next question from the audience. All right, so this one is from Ben, and Ben says, do you have a recommended regenerative for import-export of tropical crops? When I was working in Jamaica, many farmers, beyond normal processing and packing standards, many farmers want to know how to differentiate their products from larger plantation-style growing in Mexico or Brazil. They've been burnt before when the banana industry collapsed. All right, so
got it. I think I understand the question. I think the question is actually around regenerative, like a standard for the crop. So this is an interesting, tricky question. I mean, working towards actual regenerative relationships between small-scale farmers in many parts of the world, tropics or arid or wherever, and the sort of larger global industry is tricky, and unfortunately requires time to figure out and get right, and still needs a number of like trusted intermediaries to help everything go well. I think there's a promise in the future of a sort of blockchain approach to everything, where you can have documented and verified the regenerative nature of what you're doing on your farm. There can be a buyer somewhere who says, I need regenerative bananas, or it's hard. Regenerative bananas are very difficult, by the way. Regenerative bananas, regenerative mangoes, whatever that is, and then you can just have an instantaneous connection, and the sale is made, and it's all trusted. But we're still a ways from that happening. So I think my response to that would be to focus local and regional first, because it's easier to make the relationships for either local sales or towards import export. And then The second part would be seek relationships with folks who have built some experience doing this in a good way. I'll point to an example of a company called Sol Simple, that's working in Latin America primarily with a number of different crops, many different farmers. There's another project called the Breadfruit Project in Costa Rica that's doing a similar work of sort of cooperatives gathering together goods and then being a trusted intermediary between the local farming production and international buyers. The other kind of side of it that is slowly happening is I am seeing more and more companies, larger companies who would be those buyers, going out and starting to form direct relationships with farmers or cooperatives of farmers. And I'm always inviting them towards figuring out how to do longer term buying contracts. And this is something that I want everyone to be pushing for, both from the, the demand end and the supply end, is work to figure out how can you have longer term agreements that can withstand, shifts in commodity up and downs, that can withstand crop failures. It's more towards the sort of like CSA, community supported agriculture model, but on a large scale supply and demand perspective. I don't think there's a single standard that's out there like that will guarantee health or success of any particular import-export relationship. It's more about building the relationships of trust with the people over time, and that will yield really good results. It's a tricky question, and I think one that we would all do some more work, innovation, and thinking on. I don't think standards are the answer. I think relationships are.
I think, Ethan, just tapping into what you said about the breadfruit project, if you, after this session, you can give us the link to that, that would be great, because breadfruit is actually a staple of the Barbadian diet. And there's been a lot of talk about how it could be, and it grows quite easily too as well. It's delicious. You do everything with it, and it's healthy.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it would be really great for us to have that information, and we can put it in the link when we put up the recording. Yeah. All right. So we have another question. And why is business so stubborn at making the right changes? Why is money the only factor they account for? Can we change this?
It's a big question. Yes, it can be changed. There's many different proposals or theories of change about how to move this in the world. My preferred route is through being a business that isn't stubborn, and a business that does take more than money into account, and be wildly successful in terms of financial capital. There's another framework that maybe Gregory touched on, or we could go through at a different time, around Regenerative Enterprise, which looks at 8 different forms of capital. And how they interrelate and work with each other. So that's my preferred route, is to work with business to help them make changes, to move, to innovate, to figure out and see how, wow, actually carbon farming isn't an environmental thing. Carbon farming increases productivity and does this good for the world. So why? It's such a big question. Why is it so stubborn? There's a number of responses, but I think the key is actually not focusing on why so many businesses are stubborn, but instead finding the ones that aren't and being the ones that aren't. And I'm seeing a huge amount of energy from younger millennials and Gen Z who are stepping into business roles. We did a challenge with Thought for Food earlier this year, a circular economy of food challenge. It had 5,000 groups from all over the world submitting circular economy ideas. And it was pretty exciting to see this sort of upswell. And then as companies are changing, older, more stubborn, often stubborn white men are leaving, and younger folks from different places all over the world are taking on leadership positions. So I am actually seeing business change, even like big business. You can look, as an example, just to tie us back to biodiversity here, you can look up the OP2B, the One Planet Business for Biodiversity. which is a global consortium. I think there's 21 companies in it now that will, generate, I think it's over 500 billion in revenue a year. And this includes Google and Mars and Danone and some really significant players who have made very forward-thinking commitments and statements about biodiversity, regenerative agriculture, and supporting high-value protecting ecosystems. And if you look at that, 500 billion is much more than that now. And the scale of the commitments they've made, it's exciting. It's making business seem not quite so stubborn as they would have been even 5 or 10 years ago. So yeah, there's hope.
All right. Okay, so I wanted to do one more question. So maybe, okay, let's do one more question. I know we're kind of running close to the end of our time, but this discussion is really going very well. And so the question is, how long did it take to develop a sustainable database? Good question. It's a lot of information. Yeah.
Substantial sustainable database. It took a long time. I mean, How Good's been at it for 13 years. Our database was pretty awesome even 6, 7, 8 years in, but it's taken a significant amount of time to build up the level of data that we have across all of the different facets that we cover. And maybe I'll just use that as a bit of a jumping off point to talk about one last subject in our sort of the title of this talk that I haven't hit on yet, which is about planetary health. This is an aspect of the database that's come in for us in the last few years, which is incorporating nutrition into our understanding of sustainability and regenerative agriculture. And so this is towards planetary health and the idea of a planetary health diet, like a diet that we could all eat, of course, specialized and customized to our individual locations and cultures, et cetera, but a general shape of a diet that we could all eat that would simultaneously have excellent nutrition for ourselves, but then also have a major, have the best chance at positive health for the planet. And so this is a diet that is, it's not like it's not a vegan diet or anything like that, but it uses this term that I would call, I was a vegan for 5 years. It's very interesting. I learned a lot. I got very sick. Wasn't right for me.
I think I might agree with you there. It's not right for me, but go ahead.
I think this planetary health diet is what I would call plant forward.
Mm-hmm.
So it's focused on plants. There's there's breadfruit and jackfruit and delicious things on the plate, and a little bit of delicious local fish or high quality holistically managed meat that you raise locally. But that plant forward idea, and then integrating how do you track nutrition of individual ingredients, and more we're starting to see the data come out that regenerative agriculture actually creates higher nutrition. So the nutritional quality of a tomato or a grape or something grown with regenerative agriculture is higher than that of a conventional one. And I think we'll see more and more data showing this. So it's just a final useful link to bring in of planetary health, our own nutritional health, wrapped together through regenerative agriculture and biodiversity.
All right, that's awesome. Ethan, thank you so much. We are out of time. Thank you to the audience for lively participation. We look forward to having you back in May to further this scintillating discussion with Ian and with Gregory. And I just want to say thank you very much and see you soon.
Thanks.
All right, great. Bye. And so if you've missed today's session, you can review it again on WIRRED and CPRI's Facebook pages, or go to WIRRED's YouTube page for the full recording. Next week on the 28th, you can join Jen from CPRI as she chats with Veronica Prado, energy specialist with the Inter-American Development Bank, on renewable energy. And of course, how that is moving forward in the Caribbean. And then you can join me again on Thursday the 30th as I jump into conversation with Kiesha Carrington about bridging the gap between art and climate change. So thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you catch the recordings. Join us next week. Be safe and see you next week.